People like you do not belong in a car like this. Those words, spoken at 1:12 a.m. by Officer Derek Ramirez, would become the sentence that ended his entire career. And he had no idea that the woman standing before him would be the one to deliver that end. In the next breath, he seized her wrist with unnecessary force, twisted her body, and drove her chest against the metal door of her own car. Pain shot through her left arm. The cuffs clamped down until blood streaked the skin. Her dignity, her authority, and her safety were reduced to a single crushing moment under the weight of a man who believed he could not be touched. Judge Aisha Thompson, calm despite the humiliation, held her breath against the burst of pain and tasted the bitter reality of what it meant to be profiled after midnight on Interstate 405. And in that single second, the future shifted. The officer who barked orders at her would walk into her courtroom within hours, unaware that justice was already moving, silent and unstoppable. Before going deeper into this story, tell me where you are watching from. Your support helps bring these true-to-life stories to more people. So if you are here with us today, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It means more than you know. Aisha Thompson had not wanted to drive home that late, but the calendar review had stretched longer than expected. Case number BA512447 demanded her full focus. It involved allegations of excessive force by a Los Angeles Police Department officer, and she had insisted on reviewing the transcripts herself. She remained in her Navy suit, the same one she wore in court earlier that day, her mind still turning through the legal questions ahead. The highway was quiet when the red and blue lights flared behind her. She slowed immediately, signaled, and pulled to the shoulder. She reached for her registration and license without hesitation. When the officer approached, she spoke clearly. "I am Judge Aisha Thompson, Los Angeles Superior Court." Ramirez dismissed it. He barely glanced at the documents before tossing them onto the pavement. She heard the papers slide beneath her car door, carried by the small breeze. She remained calm, but inside, an old wound stirred. Her father had died in a police encounter when she was 17. She remembered the phone call. She remembered the silence that followed, and she remembered the promise she made to never look away from injustice, even when it turned toward her. Dispatch confirmed everything within minutes. The vehicle was registered to her. There were no issues, no concerns, no warnings. Yet Ramirez stepped closer, irritation growing rather than fading. His hand gripped her arm, his voice sharpened. "Step out." She obeyed. She knew the law. She knew the procedures. She knew this was wrong. But she also knew that fighting a roadside injustice at 1 in the morning could cost her more than a bruised wrist. He turned her, pressed her chest hard against the car, and forced her arms behind her. The cuffs bit deep. She winced as metal scraped bone. Her blouse tore along the sleeve. She said nothing. Silence was her shield. Observation was her strength. She memorized each movement. She heard his breathing. She registered the scent of alcohol on him. And she understood that she was standing inside a pattern, not an isolated moment. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez arrived soon after. She paused only long enough to sweep her gaze over the expensive car, the tailored suit, the composed woman in cuffs. "Fits the pattern," she said quietly, as if speaking to herself. "Book her." Aisha did not respond. She watched the sergeant turn away. She watched Ramirez tighten the cuffs again, as if to make a point. She watched the young officer standing farther back, his dash cam recording. He could not hide the conflict in his eyes. His nameplate glinted beneath the streetlights. Carter. Jamal Carter. She committed the badge number to memory. When Ramirez pushed her toward the back seat, she looked at the young man for a single second. Long enough for him to understand she saw everything. "See you in court. Officer Ramirez, she whispered, not as a threat, but as a statement of inevitable truth. Ramirez shoved her inside and slammed the door. Jamal Carter did not move. He stood still, his face caught between duty and conscience, feeling a shift he could not yet explain. The drive to the station lasted only minutes, yet each minute felt like an hour. Aisha kept her breathing steady. She pressed her wrists against the cuffs, trying to ease the bite. The pain traveled up her arm. She thought about Marcus, her husband, and how he would see her injuries in the morning. She thought about her docket at 9 a.m. She thought about the case scheduled first that day, People v. Derek Ramirez. She had read hundreds of excessive force cases. She had listened to victims speak through tears. She had ruled on officers who abused authority. And now she found herself living the very conduct she had been asked to judge. The irony was sharp. It cut deeper than the cuffs. But she did not allow emotion to cloud her focus. She knew what would come next. Paperwork, detention, booking, a long night in a cold cell. She was ready. They placed her in holding with Rosa Diaz, a woman who had seen Ramirez before. Rosa recognized the signs instantly. The torn fabric, the swelling wrist, the forced silence. "He got me 8 months ago," she whispered. "I still have the photos." Aisha listened. Rosa spoke with quiet fear and quiet strength, the kind born from survival. The connection between them formed without words. Aisha's phone call was brief. "Marcus. Listen carefully," she said. "Do not come to the station. Meet me in Department 106 at 9. Trust me." She ended the call before he could respond. She knew he would be furious. She knew he would want answers. But she also knew that this story needed to be told in the only room where truth could not be buried. As the hours passed, Jamal Carter sat alone in his small apartment, replaying the footage again and again. His father's voice lingered in memory. A warning, a lesson, a weight. He understood what he had witnessed, he understood what it meant, and he understood what he needed to do. At dawn, a quiet storm was already forming. Aisha did not know the details yet, but she felt the momentum. Events had shifted, lines had been crossed, truth had a place to go, and justice, long delayed, was finally waking. Westwood Holding was quiet when Judge Aisha Thompson arrived shortly after 2 a.m., her wrists still sore from the metal cuffs that had carved thin red lines along her skin. She stood straight as the officer processed her, refusing to let fatigue or humiliation show. The booking photograph was taken quickly. Her name was entered. Her belongings were placed in a sealed envelope. She listened to each step without reacting, her mind already moving ahead to the morning. They placed her in a cell with Rosa Diaz, a woman with tired eyes and a voice touched by past harm. Rosa noticed the torn blouse and the swollen wrist the instant Aisha stepped inside. "Ramirez?" she asked softly, as if she had seen this scene before. Aisha nodded once. "8 months ago," Rosa whispered. "He pulled me out of my car for rolling a stop sign. I still have the photos. They said it was minor force, but it was not minor to me." Aisha listened without interrupting. She knew the value of a person who was finally being heard. Rosa's story unfolded gently, shaped by fear and survival, and Aisha felt the quiet weight of a pattern she had only seen in reports until now. When the officer called her name for the standard phone call, she stepped into the hallway, lifted the receiver, and spoke in a calm, steady tone. "Marcus, listen carefully," she said. "Do not come to the station. I need you to meet me in Department 106 at 9 o'clock. Trust me." She ended the call before he could protest, knowing that arriving at the station would only escalate tension and place him in the middle of something larger than either of them had planned for that night, across the city. Officer Derek Ramirez walked into his East Los Angeles apartment, threw his keys onto the counter, and opened a bottle of whiskey. His hands shook slightly as he poured the drink. Not from regret, but from the thrill of control he believed he had shown. He sat heavily in his chair and played back a portion of the body cam recording, only to press delete after watching the first minute, in his haste. He forgot that the audio had already been backed up automatically. The system captured his voice saying, "People like her always think they are untouchable," a sentence that would later play in front of a full courtroom. He did not know that his night's decisions were already out of his control. He finished the drink, fell asleep in the chair, and believed he had ended the matter. He did not yet understand that the sun rising in a few hours would bring consequences he could not escape. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Inglewood, Officer Jamal Carter sat at his kitchen table, staring at the dashcam footage he had copied to his encrypted drive. He watched Ramirez twist Aisha's arm. He watched her wince. He heard her whisper, "See you in court." It struck him more deeply each time he replayed it. His father's voice rose in memory, calm but firm, from a long-ago video call. "If you wear that uniform and stay quiet when it is wrong, you become part of the wrong." Jamal closed his eyes and breathed slowly. His father had died in a police encounter back home in Jamaica. His mother carried the memory with her every day. Jamal had joined the force to honor what justice should be, not what it sometimes became. At 4:17 a.m., he stood from the table, placed the drive into his pocket, and made a decision that would change the next 24 hours of his life. He drove to the Internal Affairs Bureau before dawn, entered through the side door reserved for officers, and told the front desk he needed to report something urgent. He waited quietly, feeling the weight of what he was doing, but also feeling the clarity of a conscience that refused to ignore what he had seen. Detective Elena Vargas arrived just after 6. She took the drive from Jamal and recognized him immediately. She remembered the panel discussion from the previous year where she and Judge Thompson had spoken about accountability and trust. She listened closely as Jamal described the events on Interstate 405. She took notes, asked precise questions, and watched the young officer's face as he spoke. She could see the fear, but also the truth, within 2 hours. Vargas accessed Ramirez's stop data and pulled a report that revealed 9 luxury vehicle stops in 24 months, all involving Black or Latino drivers. 7 were released without charges. All had been reviewed and cleared by Lieutenant Victor Hayes. Vargas closed her laptop slowly. The pattern spoke for itself. At 6:52 a.m., Aisha walked out of holding. She signed for her belongings with her injured wrist, refusing the medical treatment the officer offered. She felt pain, but she pushed it aside. She stepped into the morning light and saw Marcus waiting in the parking lot, his expression tight with worry and anger. He walked toward her quickly. "Aisha, what happened? Who did this?" She held up her hand gently. "Not here," she said. "Not now." He looked at her wrist and took a breath, steadying himself. "Then at least tell me what you want to do." She met his gaze with quiet resolve. "We do nothing today," she said. "We wait until 9 o'clock, and then we let the truth speak in the only room where it cannot be buried." Marcus understood the meaning behind her words. He nodded once. He opened the car door for her. They drove home in silence, the weight of the night settling around them like a promise. Across the city. Lieutenant Hayes finished shaving when he received a call from Internal Affairs requesting immediate access to Ramirez's personnel files. He stared into the mirror, the razor still in his hand. He knew what the request meant. "If this explodes before I retire," he whispered to himself, "my pension is gone." He placed the razor down carefully. He felt the quiet fear of a man who had signed off on too many questionable cases and now faced the consequences. As the city began to wake, each person moved through the final hours before court with rising tension. Jamal sat alone in his car outside the Internal Affairs building, breathing slowly, knowing the day ahead would change how the department saw him. Rosa sat in her apartment, preparing the photographs she had kept in a small box for months. Ramirez slept heavily, unaware of the storm forming just beyond the edge of morning, and Aisha prepared her robe for the 9 a.m. session, her movements deliberate and calm by the time she stepped into the courthouse. The plan was no longer a plan at all. It was the natural path of truth moving toward daylight. And daylight, once it touched this story, would not let go. Detective Elena Vargas arrived at the Internal Affairs Bureau just after sunrise, holding a cup of black coffee she never touched. She knew something serious had happened the moment she saw Officer Jamal Carter waiting in the interview room, sitting straight, hands folded, eyes clear but tense. She had met him only once before, in a panel discussion on police reform where Judge Aisha Thompson had spoken with calm conviction about accountability. Vargas stepped into the room, closed the door, and placed the encrypted drive on the table between them. "Start from the beginning," she said. Jamal took a breath and described everything in steady detail. He explained Ramirez's language, the force used on Judge Thompson, the dismissal of dispatch confirmation, the handcuffs cutting her wrist, and her quiet statement, "See you in court." Vargas listened without interruption, recognizing the tone of a man who understood exactly what silence would cost. When he finished, she opened her laptop, inserted the drive, and watched the footage. Aisha's voice, steady yet strained, Ramirez's hand twisting her arm, the metallic click of the cuffs tightening, the sentence that cut through the night. "People like you do not belong in a car like this." Vargas pressed pause and sat still. She had seen many recordings in her years at Internal Affairs, but the mixture of arrogance, contempt, and certainty in Ramirez's voice carried a weight she could not ignore. Within 2 hours, she pulled Ramirez's stop data from the system. Rows of entries appeared, each one nearly identical. High-value vehicles, minority drivers, vague justifications, 9 stops in 24 months, 7 released without charges, 2 contested, all cleared by Lieutenant Victor Hayes. She printed the report and placed it into a growing folder. She then requested audio logs from the body cam server, and the system provided the automatic backup Ramirez had forgotten to delete. She listened to his voice again. "People like her always think they are untouchable." She saved the file. She added it to the evidence list. She understood what this meant, and she understood that this case would not remain contained inside her office. It would expand until it reached every corner of the department, while Vargas assembled the pieces. Ramirez woke up in his apartment with a heavy head and no memory of saving the audio file. He believed he had erased everything. He believed the night was over. He believed Judge Thompson was simply another person he had shown proper control. He ate cereal without tasting it, rehearsing his testimony for the excessive force case scheduled at 9 o'clock. He did not yet know who the presiding judge would be. Across town, Marcus Thompson prepared a quiet breakfast for Aisha, though neither of them ate much. He watched her wrap her injured wrist carefully before placing her robe into its case. He asked her once more, "Are you certain you want to handle this today?" She answered in a calm voice, "I am certain there is only one place where this story must be told." Her tone held no anger. It held purpose. It held the memory of her father's final day. Marcus understood without further questions. He drove her to the courthouse in silence, staying close but letting her lead the way. At the same time, Lieutenant Hayes sat at his desk, staring at the request from Internal Affairs. He read it 3 times. He knew what they were looking for. He knew they had found something significant. He dialed a number, stopped midway, and hung up. He looked at the framed certificate on his wall. 30 years of service. He thought of his pension, scheduled to begin in 6 months, and he felt the first cold wave of fear wash over him. "If this breaks open," he whispered, "everything falls with it." He rubbed his temples and thought through possible responses, but the truth was simple. He had signed off on too many cases without reviewing them. He had allowed Ramirez's stops to pass through unquestioned, and now the pattern stood exposed. Jamal left the Internal Affairs building feeling the weight of what he had done, but also the clarity that came with it. He knew the department would not welcome his actions. He knew the whispers would begin, but he also knew his father's voice would not let him remain silent. He sat in his car for a moment and looked at the courthouse in the distance. He knew his path for the day was not finished. At 8:30 a.m., Vargas called the district attorney's office. She asked for Assistant District Attorney Lisa Chen and requested an emergency evidentiary transfer. Chen arrived within minutes, her expression serious as she reviewed the report. She watched the dashcam recording twice, her face tightening with each frame. "This is going to detonate," she said quietly. Vargas nodded, then let it. Chen gathered the files, the drive, and the audio, and headed for Department 106. Meanwhile, Aisha stepped into her chambers at 8:45 a.m., placed her robe neatly on the chair, and examined her wrist briefly. The bruise had darkened. The scratch remained sharp. She breathed steadily, allowing herself one moment of reflection before stepping into the world again. She knew what the morning would bring, though she did not yet know the full scale of it. Inside the courtroom, Ramirez arrived with his defense attorney, Paul Nguyen. Ramirez wore his Class A uniform with polished shoes and an air of confidence that came from believing he had survived the night without consequences. He joked quietly with Nguyen about possible outcomes. He expected a difficult but manageable hearing. He expected a judge he did not know. He expected a routine process. He did not expect truth to stand above him in a black robe. As the clock neared 9, more people entered the courtroom. Rosa Diaz sat quietly in the back row, holding the photographs she had printed that morning. Malik Johnson arrived with a careful step, his knee still damaged from the force Ramirez had used 18 months earlier. Jamal stood near the side door, waiting for a signal from Vargas. None of them spoke, but each felt the rise of something long delayed. When the bailiff finally called the courtroom to order, a hush settled across the room. Every story, every injury, every hidden truth converged into that single quiet moment. And as the side door opened, and Aisha Thompson stepped forward in her black robe, justice came into full view. At 8:58 a.m., Department 106 was already filled with the quiet tension of a day that no one realized was about to become historic. The bailiff stood near the bench, waiting for the signal. Attorneys whispered. Observers settled into their seats. Officer Derek Ramirez entered the room wearing his Class A uniform, the same one he polished for commendation ceremonies, unaware that within minutes everything he believed about control, authority, and consequence would shift beneath him. He walked with a confident stride, speaking lightly to his attorney. "Paul Nguyen, this should be quick," he muttered. "These cases always fall apart." Nguyen gave a polite nod. Not knowing what awaited them, Ramirez adjusted his collar, straightened his nameplate, and waited at the table. He expected a judge he had never met. He expected a process he understood. He expected another morning where he would speak about necessary force and walk out without consequence. Instead, the bailiff called the court to order, and the side door opened with a soft but decisive sound. Silence followed. Every person in the room turned at once. Judge Aisha Thompson stepped through the doorway, her black robe falling cleanly over her shoulders as she ascended the bench with the same calm authority she carried through every case of her career. Ramirez's face drained of color, His knees weakened. His hand, still holding a glass of water, trembled until the glass slipped from his grip and shattered against the floor. He did not move. He did not speak. He stared at the woman he had handcuffed, shoved, and dismissed as insignificant only hours earlier. His breath caught in his throat. His world narrowed to a single truth he could not escape. The judge presiding over his hearing was the woman he had arrested the night before. Aisha sat, lifted her chin, and let the silence settle. 5 slow seconds passed. She used each one to reclaim the dignity he had tried to strip from her. She pressed the microphone button. Her voice was steady, measured, and unmistakably firm. "Good morning. Before we begin, I have a disclosure pursuant to Canon 3. A slight rustle passed through the gallery. Ramirez grabbed the edge of the table, his fingers white with tension. Aisha continued in a clear, even tone. "Last night, at approximately 1:12 a.m., the defendant in this case placed me under arrest for driving my lawfully registered vehicle. I was searched, detained, and held for 6 hours. A wave of shock moved through the room. Phones buzzed. Someone in the back began recording. Another whispered, 'Is this real?' Aisha maintained her focus. Her eyes never left the bench. 'I confirm that the events of last night have no bearing on my legal obligation to hear this case with impartiality. I further confirm that the defendant's conduct last night will be addressed through the appropriate federal channels after this hearing.' She paused, letting each word settle into the air. Ramirez's breathing grew shallow. Nguyen leaned toward him, whispering urgent questions, but Ramirez could not answer. His thoughts splintered, his control dissolved. The authority he had wielded so freely hours earlier now stood before him in a robe he could not challenge. Aisha looked toward the prosecution table. "Miss Chen, please proceed." Assistant District Attorney Lisa Chen rose, holding a stack of documents prepared by Internal Affairs only moments earlier. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, the people are prepared to present new evidence relevant to this case." She handed copies to the clerk, who distributed them to the defense and the bench. Aisha reviewed the first page without emotion. It contained the summary of 9 vehicle stops conducted by Ramirez in the past 24 months, all involving minority drivers. At the bottom, each stop bore the same initials, VH. Lieutenant Victor Hayes, clearing officer. She lifted her gaze. "Mr. Nguyen, have you reviewed these materials?" He nodded, though his face revealed confusion and growing alarm. "Your Honor, this is unexpected. The defense needs a moment to." Aisha raised her hand slightly. "You may have 10 minutes." Nguyen nodded again and leaned closer to Ramirez. "What is this?" he whispered. Ramirez stared at the table in front of him. "I do not know," he whispered back, though the tremor in his voice revealed the truth. He knew the pattern. He knew the stops. And now he knew they had been uncovered in the gallery. Rosa Diaz sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had arrived early, carrying the photographs she had printed that morning. She watched Ramirez with a calm, steady expression that came from knowing the truth had finally found its moment. Malik Johnson sat beside her, leaning on his cane. He had not planned to speak, but he wanted to be present. His knee still ached from the injury inflicted by Ramirez 18 months earlier. He looked at Aisha with quiet admiration, seeing in her the resolve he had needed during his own case. When the 10-minute break ended, Aisha returned to the bench. "Proceed," she said. Chen stepped forward. "Your Honor, the people request permission to play the dashcam footage submitted by Officer Carter this morning." Aisha nodded. "Granted." The lights dimmed slightly, the screen flickered on, the room fell still. The footage began. Ramirez's voice echoed across the courtroom. The contempt in his tone was unmistakable. Aisha's recorded voice responded calmly. The footage showed him twisting her arm, slamming her against the door, and fastening the cuffs until her wrist bled. The gasp in the room was sharp. Ramirez shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as he watched his own actions projected before the very judge he had degraded. An audible whisper spread through the gallery. She warned him. Someone said quietly. She told him she would see him in court. Aisha let the footage finish. She spoke softly but firmly. The recording is entered into evidence. She turned to the defense. Mr. Nguyen, do you wish to respond? Nguyen rose slowly, his voice hesitant. Your Honor, the defense requests a continuance to review the new materials. Aisha shook her head. Denied. The conduct captured in the footage speaks for itself. We will proceed. Ramirez opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words formed. His confidence, once unshakable, had fractured completely. The robe before him represented a power he had underestimated. Aisha continued without pause. This courtroom will move forward with full transparency. The truth that was hidden in the early hours of the morning will now be examined in daylight. She looked directly at Ramirez. Officer Ramirez, justice does not sleep, and this court does not bury the truth. The room remained silent. The shift was complete. Ramirez, once the man giving orders on a dark highway, now sat powerless before the woman he had tried to diminish, and the day was only beginning. The lights dimmed as Assistant District Attorney Lisa Chen prepared the final sequence of evidence, and the courtroom moved into a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. Every person in Department 106 understood that they were about to witness the full truth of what had been hidden for months, perhaps years. Aisha Thompson sat upright on the bench, her posture steady, her expression calm but resolute. She had waited her entire professional life for a moment when truth would stand so clearly that no one could look away. Ms. Chen, she said, her voice firm. You may proceed. Chen nodded, connected the drive provided by Internal Affairs, and projected the complete timeline compiled by Detective Elena Vargas and her team. The first image appeared, a spreadsheet of 9 vehicle stops, each marked with the date, time, and racial background of the driver. The pattern was unmistakable. Only Black and Latino drivers, only high-value cars, only vague justifications. Your Honor, Chen said. The people call Detective Vargas. Elena stepped to the stand, her suit neat, her voice steady. She described the pattern of stops, the clearance signatures, the repeated approval by Lieutenant Victor Hayes. She explained how the department's review system had been manipulated. This was not oversight. She said, it was deliberate neglect shaped by unspoken culture. She stepped down. Aisha nodded politely, acknowledging the calm precision of the testimony. Then Chen lifted the next folder. The people call Rosa Diaz. Rosa walked slowly to the stand, carrying a thin envelope. Her hands shook, but her gaze was unwavering. She was sworn in. She opened the envelope and removed 3 photographs, her bruised shoulders, her swollen wrist, the damage to her blouse. She placed them before the court. This was 8 months ago, she said quietly. Officer Ramirez said I was driving too slow. He said people like me make the city dangerous. Her voice trembled, but she held steady. I filed a complaint, but they said the force was minimal. She looked directly at Ramirez. It did not feel minimal to me. The courtroom absorbed her words. Aisha thanked her and directed the clerk to enter the photographs into evidence. Rosa stepped down, tears in her eyes but her posture tall, as if she had reclaimed something long taken from her. The people call Malik Johnson. Chen said next. Malik approached the stand. Leaning on his cane, he described the night Ramirez slammed him onto concrete during a traffic stop, injuring his knee permanently. He said I was resisting. Malik said, I was not. I was asking why he was yelling at me. He lifted the hem of his pant leg to show the scar that ran along the side of his knee. I am 17, he said softly. I used to run track. The room tightened in collective pain. His mother cried quietly behind him. Malik stepped down slowly, and then the courtroom shifted again when Chen called her next witness. The people call Officer Jamal Carter. A quiet ripple spread across the room. Jamal rose from his seat near the gallery and walked to the stand with the composed dignity of a man who understood the weight of his choice. He was sworn in. His voice was calm, respectful. I am Officer Carter, 8 months on the force. I submitted the dash cam footage you saw today, Chen asked. Why did you come forward? Jamal answered carefully. Because what I saw was wrong, and because silence makes you part of the wrong. He admitted the personal cost. He admitted the pressure he already felt. He admitted the history of his family. My father was killed by police in Jamaica. He said, I joined the department to make things better, not worse. Ramirez could no longer restrain himself. He shot up from his chair, face flushed, eyes wide. Traitor! He shouted across the room. The bailiff stepped forward instantly. Aisha raised her hand once. The room went still. Her voice cut through the tension. Cold, controlled, and deeply precise. Officer Ramirez, sit down. He obeyed, breath shallow, posture broken. Aisha looked toward Jamal. Thank you. Officer Carter, you may step down. Jamal returned to his seat, his head high. Knowing he had crossed a threshold that would follow him for the rest of his career, Chen then closed the prosecution's presentation. Your Honor, the people rest. A silence followed, heavy and full. Aisha allowed it to sit. She reviewed the files again. Though she had already made her decision, she pressed the microphone button gently. This court will now issue its ruling. The entire room leaned forward as if drawn by a single breath. Officer Derek Ramirez, she began, her voice steady but resonant. You stand before this court charged with excessive force in the matter of People v. Ramirez. Based on the testimony presented, the photographic evidence, the dashcam recording, and the documented pattern of discriminatory stops, the evidence is clear. She paused, allowing the weight of truth to settle into each corner of the room. I find you guilty on all counts. A collective exhale moved through the gallery. Ramirez's eyes widened. His attorney bowed his head. Aisha continued without hesitation. Furthermore, regarding the events of last night, which fall outside the scope of this state proceeding, I am formally referring all evidence to federal authorities for prosecution under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Gasps rose from the gallery. Phones lit up, someone whispered. That is federal prison time. Aisha maintained her calm. This court does not make that decision, she said. But it is my duty to ensure the evidence reaches the proper jurisdiction. She set down her pen. She folded her hands. Her voice softened. But the strength remained. This case is not only about one night. It is about a pattern. It is about harm repeated and dismissed. It is about the trust the public places in those who swear to protect them. And it is about the courage of those who come forward when that trust is broken. She looked at the gallery. She looked at Rosa. She looked at Malik. She looked at Jamal. And last, she looked at Ramirez. This courtroom stands for truth, she said. And today, the truth has been seen. She rose. The bailiff called. All rise. The entire courtroom stood as Judge Aisha Thompson stepped away from the bench, her robe moving with quiet authority, leaving behind a man who had believed he could not be touched, and a room that now understood what justice looked like when it finally arrived. 4 months passed before the full weight of the reckoning settled on Los Angeles, unfolding in quiet steps that carried enormous consequences. Officer Derek Ramirez entered the federal courtroom in a plain jumpsuit, no longer wearing the uniform he once believed protected him from accountability. He stood before a federal judge as prosecutors presented the same footage that had played in Aisha Thompson's courtroom. Along with the internal affairs report that now formed the backbone of a civil rights indictment, his attorney attempted to argue stress, confusion, misjudgment, anything that could soften the impact of the evidence. But the truth held firm. The judge reviewed the audio recording where Ramirez sneered, "People like her always think they are untouchable," and shook his head slowly, as if recognizing the tragic simplicity of the case when the sentence was spoken. 11 years in federal custody. Ramirez's shoulders collapsed. His final appeal for leniency was denied, as marshals escorted him from the courtroom. He caught a glimpse of his teenage son in the gallery. The boy did not look at him. He turned away, walked out with his mother, and filed a petition the next morning to legally change his surname. Ramirez received the divorce papers 3 days later in county jail, the envelope left on his bunk without ceremony, in the silence of his cell. He replayed the events of the night he arrested Aisha Thompson, realizing that a single act of arrogance had unraveled every piece of his life across the city. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez faced her own reckoning. Internal Affairs completed a comprehensive review of her supervisory decisions over the previous 2 years. The findings were stark. She had approved questionable arrests, dismissed valid complaints, and reinforced retaliatory practices against officers who voiced concerns. She was called into the chief's office for the final determination. She stood stiffly at attention, but her composure faltered when she heard the outcome. She was demoted to patrol officer and reassigned to the East Los Angeles Division, the very station she once promised she would never return to. She left the office without speaking, the weight of her new uniform pressing down like a reminder of choices she had made, and choices she had ignored. That night she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the badge she once wore with pride, realizing how loyalty to the wrong values had cost her the integrity she once believed she had. Lieutenant Victor Hayes did not fare better when Internal Affairs presented the list of 9 questionable stops he had cleared without proper review. He felt the walls closing around him. He took early retirement within 48 hours, attempting to salvage what remained of his pension, but the State Review Board intervened, and an inquiry into supervisory misconduct resulted in a severe penalty. He forfeited 60% of his benefits. The news reached him in a quiet envelope delivered by certified mail. 1 week later, after failing to answer calls from his sister, he was found unresponsive in his home, empty pill bottles on the table beside him. The department issued a brief statement acknowledging his service, but no memorial was held. His name became a cautionary example in training lectures, an officer who allowed patterns of harm to grow unchecked. The city, recognizing the scope of liability, began settlement negotiations with Aisha Thompson and 8 prior victims linked to Ramirez's pattern of stops. The evidence was overwhelming. No department attorney attempted to argue the facts. Instead, the focus shifted to resolution. The final agreement reached $4.8 million, divided across the victims, with Aisha receiving compensation for the unlawful arrest, injuries, and emotional harm. She accepted the settlement not for the financial relief. It meant little compared to the principal, but because it marked an official acknowledgement that the system had failed and that the city was taking responsibility. The judgment against Ramirez included an order for long-term wage garnishment should he ever earn income again, a statement that accountability would follow him wherever he went. Meanwhile, the consequences for Officer Jamal Carter unfolded in a different way. Though many in the community praised his courage, the department itself treated him with cold distance. Officers whispered snitch under their breath when he entered roll call. His locker was vandalized twice, though no one reported it. Some colleagues refused to ride with him during patrol rotations, citing differences in philosophy. Jamal did not respond to the hostility. He walked each hallway with the same quiet dignity he had shown in court. He reminded himself of his father's voice. He reminded himself of the promises he made when he joined the force. And slowly, a few officers began to acknowledge the truth, offering nods of respect rather than silence. Internal Affairs took notice of his resilience and his integrity. 3 months after Ramirez's conviction, Jamal received an internal letter inviting him to apply for a junior detective position within the bureau. He read it twice, feeling something he had not felt in months, a sense of possibility. He accepted the offer, stepping into a role where truth mattered more than popularity. Back in Ladera Heights, Aisha recovered quietly from the long emotional journey that had shaped her summer. The bruise on her wrist had faded, but the memory remained sharp. She met with the city's attorneys, signed the final settlement papers, and returned to her docket with a renewed clarity that surprised even her. Marcus stood by her side through every moment, proud of the dignity with which she had carried herself. Their evenings were quiet, marked by calm conversation and silent gratitude for the justice that had been achieved. Yet, even with the victories, Aisha understood that the story was not finished. The department faced pressure from community groups, city leaders, and the State Oversight Commission. The chief announced formal reviews of training practices, complaint procedures, and traffic stop protocols. A committee was formed. Recommendations were drafted. Reform became not only possible, but inevitable. And at the center of the conversation, whether publicly acknowledged or not, stood the night Aisha Thompson was handcuffed on Interstate 405, and the morning she returned in a black robe to deliver truth. As autumn settled across Los Angeles, the city looked different, not safer yet, not healed, but awake. And the people who had once been invisible in the shadows of unchecked authority now found a path toward visibility. Aisha understood the responsibility that came with such change. She carried it quietly, grateful that justice had spoken, but mindful that justice must be guarded every day. 6 months after the verdict, Los Angeles settled into a slower rhythm, as if the city itself had taken a long breath after a year of tension, exposure, and painful truth. Judge Aisha Thompson began her morning in chambers, reviewing the agenda for a private meeting with the chief of police. She had requested the meeting 3 weeks earlier, not out of anger, but out of duty. She knew the power of a courtroom judgment, but she also knew that lasting reform required policy, structure, and commitment. When the chief arrived, he carried the weary look of a man who had spent months navigating internal turmoil and public pressure. Aisha greeted him politely and offered him a seat. She then slid a thin folder across the desk. "This is a 12-point reform mandate," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It addresses reporting thresholds, supervisory review, stop criteria, training protocols, complaint routing, and accountability standards." The chief opened the folder, read the first page, and understood immediately that these were not suggestions. They were expectations. He looked up and met her gaze. "Judge Thompson," he said quietly, "I will sign this." She nodded, grateful not for the victory, but for the willingness to act. He took the pen she offered. The signature was quick, deliberate, and historic when he left her chambers. Aisha remained still for a moment, absorbing the quiet knowledge that a door had opened that might otherwise have stayed closed for years, across the city. Malik Johnson began his first day at University of California. Los Angeles on a full pre-med scholarship, awarded by a coalition of hospitals, civil rights groups, and community leaders inspired by his testimony. He walked across campus with careful steps, still aware of the lingering pain in his knee, but hopeful in a way he had not felt since the night of his injury. He paused outside the medical building, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. He called his mother. "I made it," he said. She cried softly, thanking him for his strength, thanking Aisha for believing him, thanking the community that had gathered around them. Farther south, Rosa Diaz unlocked the front door of a small office space near South Central. A new sign hung above the entrance: Diaz Community Legal Clinic. It was modest, it was humble, but it was hers. She walked through the rooms, breathing in the quiet, knowing that many would come seeking help, understanding, and guidance. She arranged her desk, placed her photographs in a drawer, and reminded herself that she had survived, spoken, and now had the chance to support others who carried similar wounds. At Internal Affairs, Officer Jamal Carter adjusted the badge on his suit jacket. Preparing for his first week as the youngest detective in the division, he had endured months of whispers, sidelong glances, and silent suspicion. But he had also gained something deeper than acceptance. He had gained clarity. He walked into the building with the same steady stride he had used on the stand, conscious of the weight of the work ahead. As he approached his new desk, he noticed a manila folder resting on the surface, marked only with his name. Inside was a single sheet, a new case assignment. He took a slow breath. Understanding the meaning immediately, he had been trusted with the responsibility of truth. He closed the folder gently, knowing that integrity demanded quiet persistence, not applause. Later that afternoon, Jamal visited Judge Thompson's chambers to deliver the file in person. He knocked softly. Aisha opened the door, surprised but pleased to see him. "Detective Carter," she said with a warm tone. He nodded respectfully. "Your Honor, I thought you should see this. It relates to patterns similar to those we addressed months ago." She accepted the file, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she said. "Your courage mattered then. It matters now." Jamal lowered his eyes briefly, humbled by her acknowledgement. "I only did what was right," he answered. She looked at him for a long moment and said, "And that is why you will continue to make a difference." As the day ended, Aisha returned home to Ladera Heights. The sun dipped low, painting soft hues across the quiet street. She parked her car inside the garage and stepped out slowly. Her eyes moved to the scratch on the BMW door, the one left by Ramirez's handcuffs on the night of the arrest. She had never repaired it. Marcus had offered many times. Friends had suggested she remove the reminder. But she felt differently. She approached the door and ran her fingertips along the thin, permanent mark. "Some scars," she whispered, "are evidence." The words carried a quiet truth, shaped by memory and resilience. The scratch represented not pain, but survival, not humiliation, but clarity. It was proof of what had been done, and proof of what had been overcome. She stepped inside the house, hung her keys, and walked toward the small room where she kept her robe. The fabric rested neatly on its hanger, black and unassuming, yet powerful in what it represented. She touched the sleeve gently, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. Without hesitation, she lifted the robe and placed it over her shoulders. Marcus entered the room and paused, watching her with quiet admiration. "Back to work?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Justice never sleeps," she said. "It is awake now, and it cannot be allowed to fade." Together, they walked to the door. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her arm. I am proud of you, he said. She met his gaze with warmth. We did not choose this moment, she replied, but we chose what to do with it. She stepped outside, breathing the calm evening air, feeling the weight of her role settle around her like a steady pulse. When she entered the courthouse, a few late workers looked up. Surprised to see her at this hour, she offered a polite nod and continued toward her chambers. The building, with its long hallways and quiet echoes, felt familiar and welcoming. She paused at the threshold of her courtroom. The lights were off, the benches empty, yet the space still held the memory of everything that had unfolded. Truth revealed, lies confronted, justice demanded. Aisha walked to the bench, stood behind it, and rested her hand on the polished wood. It was symbolic. It was personal. It reminded her of why she had chosen this life. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the moment to settle in her chest. She understood something essential. Justice was not an event. It was not a verdict. It was not a single case. It was a constant act of courage, a daily commitment, a promise renewed again and again by those willing to uphold it. She opened her eyes and whispered into the quiet room. I am ready. And in the stillness of the evening, the courthouse felt ready too. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please subscribe and give the video a like. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life.